My name is Richard Orban, and I'm a licensing and ventures manager within Oxford University Innovation. So my job is to help the university to ensure that its research and technology can deliver impact, either through licensing intellectual property to an existing company or by supporting the creation of new companies. I also help to secure some grant funding to help pay for stuff to be taken from maybe a prototype or a research phase into more of a development phase. Projects we can see coming on stream span, for example, new diagnostic tests, new therapies, including vaccines. But we've also got software, data. You can, I mean, not so much of a life sciences where I am, but if you look at more of the physical sciences side, you can have chemical entities, chemical moieties, mathematical tools, algorithms. You've also got uh, lumps of metal, new motors, engines, drive change for cars, etc. We've even helped set up a nuclear fusion company as well. I think we're now set up around 250 companies, but I typically work on around 100 projects at a time. Well, it's kind of entertaining. I mean, I've published a blog article about this, but what I generally try to do is obviously need to be proactive, because otherwise it's very easy to fall behind and lose track. So what I have is what I do is I do a full review of everything I'm working on every 2 to 3 months to work out where we are and what needs to be done going into the future. I'll then add comments in my diary about when I need to do things and how, and I make sure that they're coloured representations. Just makes it easier for me to see what's going on. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess like a lot of dyslexic people, for me, time is not a constant. It's, it varies. Perception of time varies depending on what's happening. Sometimes goes faster, sometimes goes slower. But for me, when I try to plan stuff on the article I wrote, people try to remember what they're going to do in their own head. So they try to remember what's going to happen and try to remember what we're going to do next, when, why we're doing it, who it's with. And that then, from my point of view, just causes stress because you end up being overloaded. Or in my case, you end up not doing anything because you'll forget the whole lot anyway. So what I do is I do that portfolio review, check to see what I'm supposed to be doing, when, who with, etc. And then I have in an Outlook diary, I try to diarize everything that's taking place in my diary, and I ascribe a different color for different things. So for example, if I'm traveling in Oxford, I kind of give out a red color because traveling in Oxford is a massive pain in my doodass because there's always a traffic jam somewhere. If you're going by car, you'll get stuck in traffic. If you're going by bike, you'll probably get run over. And if you're going by bus, well, good luck. You're almost certainly going to turn up late because, Oxford bus timetables are statements of ambition, not intent. And if I'm having a meeting in person, I kind of have a slightly different colors coding scheme. They're usually green. I don't know why they're green. I think they're kind of green because it's like warm, fluffy. Indoors it's warm, it's fluffy. Kind of where you usually are. It's kind of like a comfort zone. And for me, green is comfort. I don't know, like grass and fresh cut grass and stuff, I suppose, or springtime or summer. Whereas if it's an off-site meeting, then I usually put that down as a blue color. And that's largely because, well, you're going outside. We're in England, it's probably going to be cold or wet, and that's not nice. And now it's mostly kind of an orangey color because most of my meetings now are Teams or Zoom, which is kind of annoying because I've now gone from a multicolored diary, which is very easy to read, to one where now everything's basically the same color. I mean, if it's just me at my desk doing something, then that's a grey color. Or if it's me at my desk doing something which is very urgent, then it's almost black because, if you don't do it right, somebody's going to kill you.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to do is to take a diary, which is typically a written medium, and make it more of a picture, but a picture that has meaning to me and it has purpose for me specifically, so I can more easily read it and see where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm tying that diary into tasks that I have to do either today or in the future based on actively managing everything that I'm supposed to be working on. And that's recognition of the fact that I have a very poor short-term memory, but is also recognizing the fact that I have a lot of work to do. So I need to be strategic and plan ahead. And the reason why I think it's quite useful, because I mean, for me personally, it helps me. Otherwise, I just couldn't do any of the jobs I've ever done. But I also think this is something that probably be of use to people who aren't dyslexic, as many of whom I see get very, very stressed because they're doing stuff and they're trying to carry too much information in their own heads without actually distilling it down into a diary, which then gives a kind of like a time and a place for doing something. Or you have people spend all the time writing to-do lists, and then, yeah, great, but that's not actually tying it to some action. It's just a cataloguing what you haven't done. Because I'd much rather take the more positive step of this is what I'm going to do, this is the situation I'm going to do it in. And if I have any additional notes, I can attach them to that entry in my diary. It just makes everything more efficient. Some issues, for example, such as if you misread the diary and you end up going to the wrong building, but I've done more than once. Or if you get the month and a day mixed up, and then suddenly it's like, hang on, why is there nobody else here? But apart from that slight embarrassment, you just kind of tell people, yeah, I messed up here because of this reason. I'm really sorry. But that's that can kind of be circumvented by being the person who always sends out that meeting invitation. Because if you always send a meeting invitation, if it's wrong, the other person will let you know. So if you misread the date or time, or if you've misunderstood the location, you can still get that corrected, hopefully ahead of time. The most important thing for me, if I'm really, really, really busy and I simply don't know what I need to do next, then that has to trigger, you must do a portfolio review. Just stop what you're doing, spend the day, work out what you're supposed to be doing, and then get back on track again afterwards.
And would you give something like that a full day to figure it out?
Yeah, because I've got so many projects, and some of them you have to be highly strategic in the way in which you're going to do it. So it's not just a question of what you're going to do when, it's about why. For me, it's the understanding the underlying logic of why it actually makes it easier to remember stuff as well. It also makes it easier for you to articulate what's going on when talking to external stakeholders. I mean, I've obviously always known that I'm really bad at spelling. I remember at school, about 11, 12, 13 years old, every second word got, lots of red ink all over it because the teacher really liked me. She had to spend more time writing on my work than anybody else's. And then realizing, hang on, no, that's not because she likes me, because I'm actually really, really, really bad at writing and spelling. But my parents helped me a lot when I was younger in terms of spelling and extra cards. There's cards at home to try to reread and work out how to spell. But then I noticed my daughter was having issues at school. She was having problems with spelling in terms of if you were to ask her a question and ask her to talk about something, she's very good at articulating what she wanted to do and what the thoughts were. But when it came to writing it down, it was more difficult. So the school with us agreed, well, she needs to be tested. And then while she was being tested, it became apparent that I had the exact same issue she had. For me, the biggest eye-opener was the fact that words aren't supposed to move when you're reading them. And I just did not know that wasn't normal, because, I don't know how other people see when they're reading. I've always had this issue where if I spend too much time during the day reading, for example, I can have a situation when the words all start to wobble from side to side, and the spaces between the words start wobbling from side to side, just to make it even worse. And then if I keep trying to push through, all the words will just aggregate to the center of the page, and then it's just got one massive big black blob. And if it's really bad, I can also have motion sickness as well, which is awful. And I'd spent until mid-40s not realizing that wasn't normal, and not realizing that I could actually have had a lot more help than I probably did have. In fact, I know I didn't have much help. So it took me probably about 6 months or so to come to terms with the fact, actually, you didn't get the support when you were younger, but you still kind of got to where you ended up being. You still have a degree, GCSEs, A-level degree, PhD, a job you like with people you like, you're doing interesting stuff. So yeah, things weren't as easy perhaps as should have been. But I then had a kind of like a 6-month journey where I was trying to get to understand a lot more about myself, and it also allowed me to go through a journey to understand a lot of what happened to me as a child growing up. And I think I'm grateful for having gone through that experience, because I think I now know myself much better and more deeply than I think I probably would otherwise have done so. And it's also made me aware of the kinds of challenges I face that are probably specific to dyslexia rather than being generally true. And that's prompted me to find solutions that can help me, and different solutions, different tools I can use. So one of the ones I use now is, for example, whenever possible, I don't have a white background. I always try to have a faint yellow background on my computer screen, because it just gives a much better contrast. And rather than using the default font on operating system or any of the software I'm using, I try to change that to more of a dyslexia friendly font. And those fonts are useful because a lot of fonts, for example, letters B and D are just going to be mirror images of each other, which is a nightmare for dyslexics because you need to have that clear difference in shape and size. Otherwise, everything just gets jumbled up, especially when the words are jumping all over the page already. So I try to use a font called Open Dyslexic, where each character is uniquely shaped, and each of the characters seems to be slightly heavier weighting on the bottom of the letter than at the top. I don't know why, whether it's just some visual trick of the mind or anything, but that seems to help to weight the letters in position. Doesn't always work. If I get tired or if I have been reading too much, they all start jumping over the place anyway. But it is a huge help. Black and white is just for me, and no, I just can't do that. Or if you have people having highly stylized PowerPoint presentation, slightly grey font on a white background, so it looks shiny and cooler. It's like, no, please, I just can't read that. Whereas having that color background with a highly contrasting color at foreground is great. It makes it a little easier. The books I use for my job have a slight yellow coloring inside, and that just means when I'm writing, it's a lot easier. And because I'm not typing during a meeting, for example, you don't have to worry about the fact that the notes you're taking are probably slightly disjointed or the spelling is, shall we say, creative. You can instead just focus on just taking the notes you need, or in my case, because I've got plain paper rather than line paper, I can just draw diagrams and draw pictures, and they just put keywords down and arrows joining them all together, because that will then, at a later point, when I need to look at it, that will prompt the kinds of things that I was seeing in my mind when the person was talking, which, rather than being lots of sounds and strings and letters, is probably more like a picture or a diagram. I think school's a bit odd. So if we were in a class at school, and the teacher would start talking about a subject, I could, in many instances, predict what the end of a class would be like, because it's like you can see the logical thread of what's going to happen in the future, and you knew what the outcome was going to be. If they're talking about this subject, we're bound to end up here at the end, so I'm kind of bored. Or if there's any awkward person in the class putting a hand up asking awkward questions that the teacher couldn't answer, it was probably me. But at the same token, if you asked me to write an essay about what I'd just gone through, or asked me a few days later, I'd just forgotten. I just simply hadn't got a clue. But I got everything at the time. And I could see other people in my class who hadn't understood everything at the time, but could understand it a few weeks later just because they'd written notes. Yeah, I could also tell for myself that simply reading the books and reading my own notes just did not work. Whereas a consistent theme, whereas if the work was being presented or the idea was being presented more of a pictorial form or pictorial representation, I always got it, I always understood it, and I never forgot it. So that's when I started thinking, well, maybe for me, rather than just writing out lots of notes, which involved, a lot of time, a lot of writing, lots of time being spent putting in words that aren't really adding meaning, we're just linking other words together where the meaning is. Why don't I put this out as something I call a mind map? At the time, I didn't know there was such a thing called a mind map, or that stuff even called mind maps at all. All I had was on a piece of paper the central theme of what that class was as a word or an expression in the center of the page, put a color box around it, then had lines with key concepts coming off, and then they were linked together in a way they should be linked together based on what was in the textbook or what was covered in the class. Then I'd highlight it in different colors, or if there's a diagram that described it better, I would just use the diagram or would just use a picture. And that then meant that I'd go to, for example, a school or a university as an undergraduate, take notes, join a class as anybody else would in terms of handwritten notes as they're being presented. And then I go to my room, convert it all into mind maps, and then I would learn the mind map instead of rereading the notes and instead of rereading the textbooks, because by going through the mind map, it meant that I had a pictorial representation of what I needed to understand. And it also provided means which I can get down to root cause of why. So rather than just understanding what something was or how it was working, I could try to get to grips with why, because it was a why this was happening or whatever it was, but at the same token, that pictorial representation put together and made sure that I could remember, and that then meant that I could regurgitate or critically evaluate in a different context if I was answering a more advanced question during an exam. I started doing that, A-levels, and then carried it through to this point in time. So those two articles that you've read, or the two articles of mine that you've written, they were originally mind maps before I converted them into words.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
The mind maps have been thrown away now because I only did it in a rough form. But they were eventually written up in words and then published as words. But for me, it would have been much better if it could have been done as mind maps. So, I mean, I always find that useful. So as an undergraduate student doing science, you have a variety of different subjects to cover. But because I was doing the mind maps and because of the way my mind works, I think, I was able to join stuff together across different subjects, which I don't think others necessarily did. So I was having chemistry classes, and that was having biochemistry classes, and the biochemistry was having microbiology, and everything somehow got related to physics at some point. And I was able to join those dots together just because I just was always trying to find connections. Because there is clearly a strong heredity component, because my daughter's dyslexic, I'm dyslexic. My dad read my articles and went, actually, I think I'm dyslexic as well now. But I've got an atrocious sense of direction, so much so, in fact, it used to be a game when I used to work in Edinburgh. I had my co-workers would put me in Edinburgh, tell me to point at a famous place, and I got it wrong every single time. Not the same for every single person. In the same way, I mean, dyslexics are themselves as different as people who are non-dyslexic. There's a massive spectrum of different people, different disabilities or ability, and it makes sense to recognise that in the vocabulary we use to describe it. Consequence of some of the challenges I've faced, I've had to overcompensate. So I am incredibly well organised in terms of how I do things when I need to do them, and that's partly because I have to be, but it's also partly a benefit for others. I think I am good at seeing connections or disconnections that others may be missing. And I think when I know something, I will always know it, and I'll always be able to retrieve it, and I can always retrieve it in a way that's possibly more creative than others may come across. So when I know something, I truly, generally have a very, very deep understanding of that process. I think I'm also very good at doing the creative thinking, creative outputs as well. It's very hard to do via Teams or Zoom, but in person, I find it quite easy to read people. It can be very useful in terms of working out which people may be given a perception of being able to work together, but maybe having some level of a friction they're not necessarily discussing. Because if you're going to set up a company, run a company, you're going to come across situations that are challenging, and you're going to have disagreements. So you do need to know how to disagree. I'd also argue in some instances, some people need to learn how to agree as well, in the sense that it's an agreement, but it's subject to caveats, and it may change in the future. But it's about looking at people, reading people, working out how to work with people, and how to ensure people can also work with each other. So that if you've got, I say, academic founders who are good at the science or technology, how can you have people from outside their world working with them and adding value and working with them in a way that they're all comfortable? And also in a way in which they're comfortable working with me or any of my colleagues. I need to be able to manage those kinds of relationships at a much more personal level. And most of the inventions we work on have been a product of more than one person's work. You usually have teams of people to work with, so you're always going to have that potential friction between individuals, and you need to be able to manage those differences between those people. We're trying to build her confidence, say, look, this is going to be more difficult for you, but there's other stuff you can do as well. If you look at where you're able to write a story and think of a story, even if you can't put it down to words straight away, the stories you're coming up with and you're describing to us verbally are fantastic. It's just putting it into words, it's a bit more of a challenge. It just means you need to work a bit harder. And then my pet peeve of, pet love of mind maps then stepped in saying, well, maybe you should use a mind map to plan out what you want to say. So that you're thinking about it as a diagram, as a picture, and lots of images and animations. Maybe you should put that down first and then see if you can get some words that match that diagram, so somebody who isn't dyslexic can still follow your story. Because when you write it, I can see it all, I follow it naturally, but your mum isn't and she can't. So you need to find a way because you can move from me understanding the story to her understanding the story as well. And that's kind of what we're doing, but we're trying to do it in a way which is very slow. It's no need to rush. There's no need to solve everything now. You've got plenty of time. You'll get to where you want to be almost certainly at some point in time in the future. You just need to be patient. You just need to keep trying. But then we had a situation where we kind of both getting to understand each other, both going through that journey of understanding how our own minds work, having conversations with each other to see how each of us sees stuff, and then recognize there's a high degree of similarity, which makes it easy for us to communicate with one another, builds a stronger relationship between us. But it also means if she gets stuck, I can give her a hand, or if I get stuck, I can talk to her and she'll go, just do it this way. And we can kind of help each other because we can kind of understand how the other person's seeing and how the other person's thinking. And I think that's a great way to do it because it provides a means in which you can be mutually supportive, but at the same time you can be challenging in terms of, well, yeah, it would be nice if you could do it this way, but you need to recognize if other people aren't dyslexic and this is how we have to communicate with them, or it's how they'd expect to have us communicating with them. So we need to find a gap between the two. Yeah, I think the future is going to be slightly easier for us because we've gone from much of human history, information has been shared in written word. Thanks to digital technologies, that is still going to be the case going in the future, but you're having more and more instances of vlogs, blogs. I mean, historically it was also always blogs, but we've now got vlogs, so you don't necessarily need to do writing. You can just have a conversation, talk and explain. A lot of people when do PowerPoint presentations or talks, they're moving away from having slides with lots of words on to now having slides with diagrams or pictures on. So I think the world is slowly moving more toward where we are, which is great for us, but it also means we can help other people as well. I mean, I can't remember who said it. It was a comment I read on Twitter some time ago. I mean, conventional thinking suggests you need to have a bunch of people, have each of them thinking outside the box so you can be creative. So why not just make it easy for yourself by having a diverse team and have each person thinking inside their own box but working together? What I don't know what the proper term is, but it's what I'd call something like a learning culture.
Mm.
So rather than having to have somebody constantly standing up going, I find that difficult, can we do this a different way? You can instead have people saying, well, we need to do something different. Let's check to see whether this will work with everybody. Then you have a much more open and inclusive conversation around what would work, what wouldn't work, and how best to take it forward. And that's then changing the narrative to rather than being what adjustment do we need to make it easier for you, it could be, well, what can we learn for you to make it easier for everybody? These are my blue glasses, so these make it easier for me to do the reading, so the words move around a lot less. I can't remember how they work. I did read the article about how it worked, but I didn't do the mind map, so I've forgotten. They do make it a lot easier for me. Only being recognised as being dyslexic, a couple of years ago, so mid-40s. But a lot of the time as a child, I was getting stress that I probably didn't need to have, and that's simply because of how the way in which I need to process information had not been recognised or acted upon until I myself chose to do it. And I also noticed that there is a propensity for dyslexics to be underemployed or unemployed, disproportionately so. That's going to be another source of stress and discomfort and anxiety. And generally speaking, if you're kind of slightly outside of the norm, whatever the norm is, there's going to be added pressure. So I wanted to be able to support people. And for me, I felt that as I'd coped with my dyslexia, well, I felt reasonably well up to mid-40s. It suggests I'm probably okay dealing with stress and anxiety myself. So if other people have been stressed or highly anxious, I'm probably going to be okay when I talk to them. And I think because of some of the strengths that dyslexia gives you, I would hope be able to support them to help them. If there's any child out there watching this and they're having difficulties at school, they're finding it difficult to spell, or if they get a blank piece of paper, they don't know how to fill that piece of paper when they're asked to write an essay or do some writing, don't worry, it's fine. It gets easier as you get older. And as you get older and move through the education system, you'll become decreasingly dependent on a pen and paper and possibly more dependent on a computer with a spell checker. So it's going to be okay. Don't worry.